So we are in Job 15. We started that, I believe, last week, maybe the week before, but we got maybe 6 verses into it, maybe a little further. No, we got 6 verses into it. So Job 15, Eliphaz is speaking. It's his speech in round two. The tone there, I think we talked a lot about it. I think Eliphaz is actually thinks he's being comforting, and so his tone when he delivers his words are as a friend who comes up next to you to help you rather than a lecturer or a mentor that might be standing above you or even a disapproving you know teacher or something like that, shaking his fist at him or finger at him. I think he's not doing that. He's mostly soft spoken, and even though he says things that don't actually apply to Job, um, he is the most friendly of all the friends. uh, I also should mention at some point, and I don't know when I would work this in, so I'll just mention it right now. Uh, if you add up all the verses and you see who gets the most space in the book of Job, according to the verses among the three friends, Eliphaz gets somewhere around 139 verses, something like that, maybe 136 total verses in
Mm.
the whole book. Both of his friends each get 49 verses. So he gets, twice as much, almost 3 times as much as either of the other guys. Um, Zophar doesn't even have 3 speeches. He gets his 49 verses in 2 speeches. It takes Bildad 3 speeches to get his 49 verses in. Job, on the other hand, gets something like, I don't know. Now that I've said that, I probably should look it up, right? Um, it was, oh, I'm not going to be able to find it really quickly. Um, there it is. Let's see. Job gets 489 verses, so he talks a lot. And Eliphaz gets 113. Bildad and Zophar get 49 each. Later on, we're going to be introduced to another guy, Elihu, who's been sitting there quietly so far the whole time, but he's been there. He gets 165 verses, so he speaks more than any of the friends. The
Mm.
narrator, who starts chapter 1 and ends in chapter 42, and if we credit him with the speech in the middle, chapter 28, he gets 71 verses, and God gets
Wow.
132 verses. So if you rank the speakers, Job speaks the most, followed by Elihu, followed by God, and then followed by Eliphaz. So
Mm.
interesting to think about, to notice that. Um, so what we had talked about last week, Eliphaz's first presentation, or his first part of his presentation here in verses 1 through 6, he is just asking Job to consider that he's not speaking like a wise man, that his own words are tripping him up here, and that because he is being adamant in his protestations of being innocent, he is now starting to say things that are getting him into trouble. And he needs to stop doing that. He's going to have a second part of that kind of thought in what we're going to start with tonight, which is verses 7 to 16 in chapter 15. He's going to remind Job what he said earlier, not what Job said earlier, but what Eliphaz said in his first speech, which was, nobody is pure in God's eyes. And so, Job, how can you claim to be pure? Right? So he's going to do that. That's what he's, and then he's going to round out his speech, the last verses, 18 verses, verses 17 to 35, 18 or 19 verses, is the fate of the wicked. And this is how all of the speeches in this cycle are going to end, the fate of the wicked. So,
Mm.
so let's look at we'll read verses 7 to 16, Job 15, and then I'm going to pick up talking about something in verse 11 through 13. So 7 to 16. Are you the first man who was born? Eliphaz says to Job, or were you brought forth before the hills? Have you listened in the counsel of God, and do you limit wisdom to yourself? What do you know that we do not know? What do you understand that is not clear to us? Both the gray-haired and the aged are among us, older than your father. Are the comforts of God too small for you, or the word that deals gently with you? Why does your heart carry you away, and why do your eyes flash that you turn your spirit against God and bring such words out of your mouth? What is man that he can be pure, or he who is born of a woman that he can be righteous? Behold, God puts no trust in his holy ones, and the heavens are not pure in his sight. How much less one who is abominable and corrupt, a man who drinks injustice like water. So this is not it's not everything he says, but this is the next part of the speech that he has. He's going to follow this up with um, words about the wicked and their end. So if we look at verses 11 to 13, just back up and look at those again. We see that he says, "Are the comforts of God too small for you, or the word that deals gently with you? Why does your heart carry you away, and why do your eyes flash that you turn your spirit against God?" Sorry, and bring such words out of your mouth. So Eliphaz is thinking of emotional outbursts that Job has had previously, and he's said some things that Eliphaz thinks are wrong and are condemning Job, and that Job should just take a break and sit back and think about what he's saying so that he's not condemning himself anymore. And I think he's got some things in mind. I have a kind of list of them out here in Job 6:4. Job says, "The arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit drinks their poison. The terrors of God are arrayed against me." And this might be one of the things that Eliphaz made note of. And Job is saying a silly thing, wrong thing here. In Job 7:12 to 20, Job said to God, or at least he's saying what he would say to God, "Am I the sea or a sea monster that you set a guard over me? When I say, 'My bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint,' then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions, so that I would choose strangling and death rather than my bones. I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are a breath. What is man that you make so much of him, and that you set your heart on him? Visit him every morning and test him every moment. How long will you not look away from me, nor leave me alone till I swallow my spit? If I sin, what do I do to you, you watcher of mankind? Why have you made me your mark? Why have I become a burden to you?" You can see how Eliphaz might take things like this and say to Job, these things are not really helping your case here. Um, and just a couple more. Job 10:2 and 3. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Let me know why you contend against me. Does it seem good to you to oppress, to despise the work of your hands, and favor the designs of the wicked? So here Job is saying, not only God don't condemn me, but he's saying, you pour your favor out on the wicked. You let their plans succeed. So this certainly sounds like foolishness, right? Not wisdom. In the same chapter, Job 10 in verses 16 and 17, Job says to God, "And were my head lifted up, you would hunt me like a lion and again work wonders against me. You renew your witnesses against me and increase your vexation toward me. You bring fresh troops against me." And then in chapter 13, 20 to 27, Job again speaking to God, "Only grant me two things, then I will not hide myself from your face. Withdraw your hand far from me, and let not dread of you terrify me. Then call and I will answer, or let me speak and you reply to me. How many are my iniquities and my sins? Make me know my transgression and my sin. Why do you hide your face and count me as your enemy? Will you frighten a driven leaf and pursue dry chaff? For you write bitter things against me and make me inherit the iniquities of my youth. You put my feet in the stocks and watch all my paths. You set a limit for the soles of my feet." So I don't know. What's your impression of? I think these are some of the things behind Eliphaz saying to Job, "You're condemning yourself by the things you've said." Um, if you were listening to Job and heard him say all these things, what would you come to that conclusion? Is that a reasonable thing?
I think if you just look at the words with no context, then sure, maybe like
Mm.
that might sound mm, yeah, then maybe that's a fair characterization. But I guess that's a big part of what we see as the problem with these friends is that they're not they're not sensitive to the context here, which is how much he's suffering, and they're supposed to be there comforting him, and they seem to not account for that.
Yeah, that's a weird thing, isn't it? I wonder if we do that too, because I think they've rationalized it. They think they understand why Job is suffering.
Hmm.
And since he rejects their explanation of why he's suffering, I think there's a in the back of their minds, and well, sometimes they actually say this, well, you deserve it then. And so there's no compassion,
Hmm.
right? The, it's not compassion for somebody who's suffering. It's interesting to me that I believe they came with compassion. They start out with compassion in their heart to him. But then you can really see it with Bildad and a little bit with Zophar, not so much with Eliphaz, but with Bildad and Zophar, you can really see that they have consigned Job to the wicked. Where Eliphaz is hasn't done that, and Eliphaz seems to be the most mature. Uh, it's he knows that Job has rejected all the advice that friends have given him, but he doesn't dismiss Job's pain as irrelevant because Job has rejected the counsel. So the other friends appear to have done that. They appear to go, well, Job, your pain is really not anything worth dealing with anymore because I've tried to deal with it and you keep rejecting the reason for it, and so I'm just not even going to take it into consideration. Kind of seems like that. Does it seem like that to anybody else?
Hmm.
I think it's a very convoluted situation, frankly, because as I said to you last week, I really struggled with chapter 15 because I found that my fault was I was bundling Eliphaz into the same bundle as his other two friends, and they had nothing compassionate, using your word, to really say to Job. I feel like Job is feeling like he's getting it from everywhere, and he's
Hmm.
struggling to try to. He's looking for God is not present. God is not present, and at that point for me, if I ever felt that God was not present for just a minute in my life, I think I would fall apart. I'm not trying to
Hmm.
compare me with Eliphaz. I'm looking at the emotions that we've been discussing for the last few lessons about this. And I just thought that my weakness of really fully understanding, I just feel like he needs God. He wants God. He loves God. I mean, he's totally, completely devastated, and he's not really hearing any good news from his friends. Do you agree with any of that at all, Chuck?
I
Or am
think
I
I
just,
agree with. I think I agree with all of that. Yeah, I think you
oh,
said
okay.
it. I think you have a good understanding of what's going on. Um, and I think it tells us something about what our Lord faced too, right? I mean, his
Yes.
closest friends, right, said things like, "No, you'll never go to the cross," and tried to stop him and never understood it all the way up to the end, and then deserted him, right, and betrayed him, all except for well, pretty much. I think John was, still there, right? John was still there, but everybody else.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then all basically to go to the cross was to be isolated, right, and to be separated from everybody, to have them turn against you, and then the whole crowd turns against him. The religious leaders have already
Mhm.
rejected him for a long time, and then God. the father, in metaphorically turns his back on him and is silent.
Yes.
And so we have
Yes.
what Job is going through pictures that. I think when Jesus said, "Don't you know that the Son of Man must suffer?" That in a lot of cases, I mean, Jesus knew that for a lot of reasons, but one of them was the book of Job. I think
Mhm.
he read that and he saw himself. The way that you're supposed to read it. This is the closest
Mhm.
human approximation, right, to the
Mhm.
sinless Savior is
Mhm.
the righteous sufferer. Um, Job's not innocent, but he is righteous, and so yeah, so we get to look at Job's difficulties, and the thing about Job's difficulties is he's basically, I mean, you could think about it as in a metaphor of being in a very dark, pitch black. I don't know. Doesn't have to be anything like a tunnel. It could be in an open field, right? And the lights go out. All the lights go out, and it's pitch black. And you have to
Mhm.
remember where the goal is and how to get there. And it's pitch
Mhm.
black, and there are obstacles, and the terrain is rough, and people are giving you bad advice. And Job, he's like in the dark the whole time, and he's got to hang on to his faith and get back to the place, get to the place where he and God are reconciled, right? And so he's
Mhm.
walking by faith the whole time, and he's being accused of
Mhm.
trusting his own misplaced claims of innocence, but he's walking by faith the whole time. So in Job 15, the next thing that happens is Eliphaz in verses 14 and 15 is going to bring up an argument that he's already used in chapter 4. I'll read it again. Job 15, 14 and 15. What is man that he can be pure, or he who is born of a woman that he can be righteous? Behold, God puts no trust in his holy ones, and the heavens are not pure in his sight. And the point is, how can any person think he's pure, right, or righteous before God? Because God doesn't even trust the holy ones around him. I mean, that's the word that's being used, the holy ones, right? God doesn't even trust them. Um, so I was thinking about this idea of God trusting things. Does God trust things? God trust people? God trust angels? What does it mean to trust
Mhm.
something?
Yeah, I don't think he has to rely on trust.
Yeah, trust. Um, yeah,
Trust implies like a limitation
of
or some
knowledge
kind of
or
lack
something.
of
Yeah,
knowledge. Like
yeah,
in order to trust someone, it implies that you don't have complete knowledge about something, so you have to rely on trust to some extent.
right. And it also implies you
Mhm.
don't have complete knowledge of,
Yeah.
you're not sovereign. I mean, you said knowledge. You're not sovereign. You're not the one who's sustaining the whole universe every second, right? You have to count on somebody else to do that, or maybe not do that. So I would submit that Eliphaz is absolutely right. God doesn't put any trust in the holy ones, but not for the reason that Eliphaz says, right? God doesn't have to put, he doesn't trust. God does not trust, I don't think, just by the basic definition of what trusting is. So I found that to be kind of humorous that Eliphaz is stating this truism as if it's a big deal, and putting it into another context. But he's echoing what he said in chapter 4. In chapter 4, 17 through 19, he says this: Can mortal man be in the right before God? Can a man be pure before his maker? Even in his servants he puts no trust, and his angels he charges with error. How much more those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust? So this is the same argument. He's brought it up before. If you'll remember back in chapter 4, this, can mortal man be right before God? this phrase was what the spirit who came in the middle of the night and raised all the hairs on Eliphaz's arms and back, uh, scared him half to death. This is what the spirit said, and Eliphaz delivers it, like it's revelation that nobody knows. Um, but so anyway, he's just returning to that same argument, and I didn't think it was a valid argument in chapter 4. I guess I still don't think it's a valid argument here in chapter 15. It's brought up again. If it were true that God did not consider anybody morally acceptable, then of course it would be fallacious for Job to think of himself as morally acceptable. But is it true that God considers nobody morally acceptable?
Would you answer that question again, please? Ask that question
Yeah, I
again.
kind of asked it in a convoluted way. Does God consider any person to be morally acceptable before him?
No.
I guess I'll say if consider from the standpoint of like God's people through faith, God sees them as righteous because of Christ's imputed righteous. So he counts them as righteous.
Like with Abraham, imputed righteousness.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a yes and a no.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I think there's truth to both saying yes and no. But
well, I think if I had asked this, name one person who God the Father looks upon as morally acceptable. Could you name one person?
Christ.
Yeah, there you go. And once you name Christ, then you also have to bring in everybody who's united to Christ by faith, like Mike said, right? Right. There is therefore now no condemnation, for those who are in Christ, right? Romans 8 chapter 1 or verse 1. So is Job one of those people who is accounted morally righteous before God? Yes, he is. And so Eliphaz is wrong that there's nobody that God counts righteous. God counts his own son righteous, and everybody his son came into the world to save. He counts them as righteous too. And so, but if it were true that God didn't count anybody righteous, then Job certainly couldn't reasonably count himself righteous, right? So the righteousness of Job's only righteous because he is united by faith to his Redeemer, right? Who he's kind of hinted at before, and he's going to get more strong in his affirmations as time goes on. And in addition, as I said, Job is a picture, a type, a shadow of Jesus. And there isn't some hard and fast rule that says a negative example can't be a picture of Jesus. You just look at the reverse. There's no rule that says that. But Job is being portrayed by himself and then acknowledged by God to be the innocent sufferer. And in that capacity, he is a picture of Jesus. But the innocent sufferer is totally acceptable before God. He's innocent. So the thing that's happened, so Eliphaz is, he's not right in his view of God. He's not right in his view of, he thinks God trusts things or doesn't trust things. So he's not right. God's too small. And he's not right in his view of how one is right before God. So we are right before God because, as Mike said, the righteousness of Christ, but also we are made righteous in sanctification as well. So that God, the most amazing verses in the New Testament to me, be interesting, to ask everybody what type of verses are the most amazing verses to you. But to me, The most amazing verses are those that say that I can please God, that God is pleased with the work of his servants. I just, for the life of me, I just, it's like such a big idea. It's so huge. I can't get my mind around that. That is just an amazing concept that God could be pleased with something that his servants could do, not just his servants in general, but in particular, for something that you could do or something that I did. God can be pleased with it. Is that a
Quite a leap,
shocking?
quite a leap, isn't it?
Isn't that a shocking,
Oh, my.
surprising? That is, I don't know. Is anybody worked all the way through that and it's not surprising to you? Um, God gives us his spirit and he empowers us. He puts us into situations and calls us to obey him, and he gives us faith so that we could. And when we do, he's pleased. It's like, wow, he's pleased with me, with all my sin and pride and failures and, anyway, amazing things. Um, so to move on, the section we're going to enter now is it's going to sound a lot like Job 4:19 to 21. So just the section right after what I read um, from Eliphaz, right? That was 17 to 19. God doesn't put trust in anybody. He says in the third line in verse 19 through verses 21, he's going to talk about the fate of people. And he's going to expand on that now in chapter 15 when he talks about the fate of the wicked. So in chapter 4, he said that people, dwell in houses of clay and whose foundation is in the dust and who are crushed like a moth. Between morning and evening, they are beaten to pieces. They perish forever without anyone regarding it. Is not their tent cord plucked up within them? Do they not die? And that without wisdom. He was talking basically about people in general at that point and saying, that everything in life beats them down and they perish forever and nobody cares or even notices and they die without wisdom. That was the end of his speech in chapter 4. When we get to chapter 15, he's now going to say very similar things. And so we'll pick up in verse 17. I'm going to read Job 15:17 to 35, and then we'll go back and talk about it. This is the major portion of Eliphaz's speech, and this is the rest of it. I will show you, hear me, and what I have seen I will declare. What wise men have told, without hiding it from their fathers, to whom alone the land was given, and no stranger passed among them. The wicked man writhes in pain all his days, through all the years that are laid up for the ruthless. Dreadful sounds are in his ears. In prosperity, the destroyer will come upon him. He does not believe that he will return out of darkness, and he is marked for the sword. He wanders abroad for bread, saying, where is it? He knows that a day of darkness is ready at his hand. Distress and anguish terrify him. They prevail against him, like a king ready for battle. Because he has stretched out his hand against God and defies the Almighty, running stubbornly against him with a thickly bossed shield, because he has covered his face with his fat and gathered fat upon his waist, and has lived in desolate cities and houses that none should inhabit, which were ready to become heaps of ruins. He will not be rich, and his wealth will not endure, nor will his possessions spread over the earth. He will not depart from darkness. The flame will dry up his shoots, and by the breath of his mouth he will depart. Let him not trust in emptiness, deceiving himself. For emptiness will be his payment. It will be paid in full before his time, and his branch will not be green. He will shake off his unripe grape like the vine, and cast off his blossom like the olive tree. For the company of the godless is barren, and fire consumes the tents of bribery. They conceive trouble, they give birth to evil, and their womb prepares deceit. So in all of this, he's talking about the fate of the wicked, and he paints a picture of constant anxiety over the terror that's hanging over them, the judgment that they know that they will face, and the consequences of that judgment, is that they lose everything and are sent off into darkness where they writhe and scream, in pain. And but even now, he says, the wicked live under the constant reminder and threat of this overhanging judgment, and that they are terrified because of it, and it just dogs their every step so that they can't enjoy any moment of life. At least that's how I understand what he just said. Does anybody understand it different from the way I summarized it? See,
No.
Mike's kind of nodding his head. I think he agrees. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say, just on the first comment on just the overall presentation, I don't think that there's a lot of wicked people who actually think about hell all that often, such that it dominates their thinking, and they're anxious about it all the time and think that they're going to face the judgment. I think that everybody knows that, but they've suppressed it. And they've done a fairly good job of hiding that from themselves. And so I would have to say that Eliphaz's kind of evangelistic use of hell here is misguided. It's not accurate. I mean, what he's saying is accurate. I mean, it's good description, but it isn't the case that the wicked person lives in constant dread and terror, right? Job makes that point in other places. He says, look, the wicked enjoy the stuff they got and they get away with it. And I think he's more right than Eliphaz. And in fact, when Job said that, I'll just read it. It's from Job 12:6. He says, the tents of robbers are at peace, and those who provoke God are secure, who bring their God in their hand. So Job had said that. Eliphaz, I think, might be trying to refute that, trying to correct what Job said. I also want you to notice something I said a couple weeks ago. Eliphaz is using pronouns about the wicked that are, he's not talking about Job. He never says you to Job. He says, the wicked, they, this will happen to them. He's not talking about Job, but I think there are some descriptions in here that he thinks are true of Job. I think we'll get to there in a second. Just because I think it's a good quote, I want to read this quote from the New Bible Commentary. Some comments on this section that I just read. It says, in this picture of the life history of the wicked man, the first section concerns his anxiety as he lives in fear of death, and the second section deals with his final destiny, that he will die before his time. All along, Eliphaz has been maintaining that Job is not one of the truly wicked, and so this description is precisely what does not apply to him. Job has not suffered torment all his days, as in verse 20, and he is not like them, hatching trouble, evil, and deceit, like verse 35. Job ought to recognize then that he does not belong to the company of the godless, and he should take care that he does not join them by his hostility toward God. That I think summarizes really well what Eliphaz is saying. He's saying to Job, your words are making it sound like you're in this company. You should, take a look and beware. You're on the wrong road. Now, Job has experienced some of the things that, at least in small measure, some of the things that Eliphaz talks about. In verse 21, Eliphaz says that the wicked man, dreadful sounds are in his ears, and in prosperity the destroyer will come upon him. So, at the very beginning of the book, Job got 4 waves of terrible, dreadful news, right, coming to him right after one thing after the other. So dreadful sounds in his ears. And if we look at how, say, the NIV translates verse 21. Terrifying sounds will fill his ears. When all seems well, marauders will attack him. But isn't that what happened to Job? Marauders attacked him when everything seems well. And so the chapter 1, very similar to what happened to Job. It's mentioned here. So I have a note on I'm not really going to expand on this. I just have a note in the outline that 22 through 30 is bracketed by references to darkness. So there's a theme there. 22, he does not believe that he will return out of darkness, and he is marked for the sword. 23, he wanders abroad for bread, saying, where is it? He knows that a day of darkness is ready at his hand. And then 30, he will not depart from darkness. Right? He will not depart from darkness. So that phrase actually is in both 22 and 30. So you have kind of a bracketing thing here. This is all about being consigned to darkness. We already knew that just from reading it, but you have a literary thing there also. In 15:25 to 27, I think Eliphaz actually thinks this is about Job. He's saying this happened, all these things happen to the wicked. That's what he's been describing. And in verse 25, he explains why. He explains why. And I think he thinks this is what Job is doing. Says, because he has stretched out his hand against God and defies the Almighty, running stubbornly against him with a thickly bossed shield, because he has covered his face with his fat and gathered fat upon his waist. We'll go there. So the part about fat is indulgence, self-indulgence, prosperity, self-indulgence, or indulging yourself. We'll just go with that. Job has been defying God in Eliphaz's view with this perverse self-assurance, indulging in his own pride or his misguided thoughts and his stubbornness. And so he's been running, as 26 says, he's running stubbornly against God. And as verse 25 said, he's stretched out his hand against God and he's defying the Almighty. So I think that is the prompting that, Eliphaz thinks that Job is doing these things, and so because he thinks that Job is doing verses 25 and 26, and Eliphaz in his theology knows that the end of people who do such things is to go into darkness, then he's telling Job, this is what happens to people who do this. Don't do this. But he's not yet consigning Job to the wicked. You can tell that by the pronouns. And also because, he thinks he's bringing comfort rather than condemnation. Hi, Ardith. We're in Job 15,
25.
25, right?
And,
Yeah, 25. And yeah, so you guys can see that, right? That Eliphaz probably thinks these things are true of Job, and that's why he's saying, you're on the highway to hell. Stop listening to AC/DC. Get on a different.
after my time.
All right.
Yeah.
So I want to skip down to verse 27, then talk about covering his face with fat and gathering fat upon his waist, and that is a illustration of self-indulgence or self-indulgence. So we have a couple of examples in Deuteronomy 32:15. God says, Deuteronomy 32, I think we're all mostly familiar with it. It's Moses's prophecy about God's people are going to become prosperous and then forsake God, go after idols, be warned, be judged, right? So he's talking about the part where they've grown prosperous. And then verse 15, but Jeshurun grew fat, that's prosperous and indulgent, and kicked You grew fat, stout, and sleek. Then he forsook God, who made him, and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. So fatness here has the idea of self-reliance and indulgence. 1 Samuel 2:29 says, "Why then do you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings that I commanded for my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering of my people Israel?" Right? They're being self-indulgent rather than engaging in the worship, the proper worship and service of God. Psalm 73:7, talking about the wicked, their eyes swell out through fatness, their hearts overflow with follies. Has nothing to do with, weight, person's weight. It has to do with their attitude of taking the good things of God and using them for themselves, or and not worshiping God rightly. So when Eliphaz uses that, he's just using this metaphor, illustration, figure of speech, I guess, that is used just to convey self-indulgence. In 1528, Job 15:28, Eliphaz says that the wicked has lived in desolate cities and houses that none should inhabit. And you might think, well, Job didn't live in a desolate city, and he still has a house, right? His house didn't get destroyed. But where is Job living right now?
Garbage. Yeah.
In the garbage dump, right? He didn't go back home. He went out to the garbage dump and he started mourning. Well, he carried on his mourning there, and his friends came to him at the garbage dump, and they're all sitting out there at the garbage dump, right? So he is. I can't think of anything. I mean, a desolate city would be pretty bad, but I think a garbage dump might be a little bit worse. Oh.
Mhm.
1529, Eliphaz says about the wicked, his wealth will not endure, his possessions will not increase. And of course, Job lost everything, and he was the wealthiest person alive. But Eliphaz says of the wicked that his possessions did not increase, but we know that Job's not wicked, and at the end of the book, everything's restored to him, and more so. So his possessions actually did increase. In verses 30 to 33, Eliphaz compares Job to a tree. We read that, or he compares the wicked to a tree, I think. And that is talking about the wicked. He will not depart from darkness. The flame will dry up his shoots. This is a tree. And by the breath of his mouth he will depart. Let him not trust in emptiness, deceiving himself, for emptiness will be his payment. It will be paid out in full before his time, and his branch will not be green. He will shake off his unripe grape like the vine, and cast off his blossom like the olive tree. I think this tree image comes to Eliphaz because Job has just used it, right, to talk about resurrection. And Job had said, a tree, can come back to life, but a man can't. But we also have, the recalling. If my mom was here, she would say, yeah, that reminds me of Psalm 1.
Mhm.
It's the Psalm 1 thing. One of the things that I thought was the most interesting was in verse 30. It says, he will not depart from darkness, the flame will dry up his shoots, and by the breath of his mouth he will depart. You might remember that at the very beginning of Job chapter 15, there was a reference to the east wind, that Job's words were like wind, and they were like the east wind. And the east wind is the destructive wind, right? And it's, but I think we have a return to that here in verse 30. It's the east wind is hot and destructive, and this is a flame that will dry up his shoots, and a breath. So it's a wind, it's the same wind word. Of his mouth he will depart. By the breath of his mouth he will depart. By the things he said, basically. So this in the chapter starts with a reference to Job's words being like wind, like breath, and being the east wind, which is destructive, hot, and destructive. And here we have a reference to hot, destructive breath coming in. So I thought that was interesting. You have kind of an inclusion there. In verse 31, he says, don't trust in emptiness. You know, that's what it means to have words like wind. They're empty. Don't trust in them. And that's what Eliphaz is saying, I think, to him. Started out by saying your words are like wind, and now he's saying don't trust in these windy things. 15:30 to 33, which I read, talks about payment, particularly verse 31, emptiness will be his payment. Eliphaz's point is that the point of trusting in emptiness or in nothing is that you end up with nothing, right? You trust in emptiness, the result of that is you lose all things. And Romans 6:23 says something like that. The wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. This is the point. The wages of sin is death. In all of the descriptions of the wicked that we're going to see in these chapters that are coming up, they all end up in darkness with nothing, because that's the wages of sin. That's what they get paid for the way they live. And thankfully, the Lord has sent Jesus and given us faith as a free gift. In 1534, I'm sorry, I'm pausing so much. I'm just going back and forth between the different texts. 1534 says the company of the godless is barren, and fire consumes the tents of bribery. So the company of the godless is barren. It's unprofitable. The company that the godless people keep they don't contribute anything. They're unprofitable. They're barren. They're even dangerous, right? And this also returns to the idea of wind and east wind, because the company of the godless is just like the godless, right? They say they're destructive in what they say, and if you believe what they say, it's believing in emptiness. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, bad company Paul says it's a true saying, bad company corrupts good morals. And Eliphaz is basically saying the same thing here. And then 1535, the very last thing that Eliphaz says, he says, they, that is the godless, conceive trouble and give birth to evil, and their womb prepares deceit. So they conceive trouble, they give birth to evil, and they prepare within themselves this deceit that they will be the next thing that comes out. He's using a illustration here that is almost very similar to how he started. He starts out saying that Job's words arise from wrong thinking, and they lead to godless behavior. And now he says the godless, what they do is they conceive trouble. What they do, their thinking produces trouble, and they prepare for deceit. They are deceiving others, and he doesn't say that they're deceiving others, but they're deceiving others and themselves. And his plea to Job and this whole thing is, don't fall for your own thinking here. You've been thinking wrong. It's producing wrong speech and wrong behavior. And if you continue to do that, I mean, you're sounding like these wicked guys, and this is not going to end good for you. So I think that's been what Eliphaz has been saying, or been trying to say there. So I've gone through all my outline on chapter 15, but I didn't let anybody else say anything very much. So it's your turn. Anybody have anything you want to say about chapter 15?
Chuck?
Yes, Catherine.
in chapter 15, verse 35 that you just read. I just need some clarity, please.
Sure.
In my NAS, I read chapter verse as this. They conceive mischief and bring forth iniquity, and their mind prepares deception. But it also has a mark on mind that means literally belly. So it could either read in their mind prepares deception or their belly prepares deception. What is your opinion of that?
Yeah, I guess I don't have an opinion. Does it, what does the, well, I do want to know what the note exactly says. Does it have anything like literally belly or?
Yes, yes, it says that, literally belly.
Yeah. So
Hey,
mine
Chuck?
then would just, yeah,
Yeah,
Gary, go ahead.
Holman uses the word, instead of belly, uses womb, but then in the notes it says womb is the same word translated himself at the opening of Eliphaz's free speech, his belly. In that case, I guess it's taken to mean belly, but
Hmm.
there's some, man, there's some hard work translating some of this.
Well, yeah, the Old Testament is very harder than the New Testament to translate. Oh, so Catherine, I
Well,
think I would say this. I would say that uh, that this is just me talking off the top of my head, that I think that probably the translation mind is made for a Western audience readership. That in the Hebrew text of the Old Testament, I don't think actually the word mind appears very often, if at all, because the uh, they didn't think of the mind as the center of the person. You know, I guess I don't know how to say that any other way. In Greek ways of thinking, we think of the mind as the center of the person. And so it would be natural to say the mind conceives. And we think probably scientifically we can prove that, but without getting into the distinction between the mind and the brain, I think, most people think mind, brain, same thing. It's where we make thoughts. Uh, so I think that belly probably is the right thing to say there. If you have two options, mind or belly, belly is probably the most true to the original text.
Mhm.
I'm gonna retract what I said about it being the right thing to say, because the right thing to say is the thing that will convey to you the thought, convey to the audience you're trying to reach the original thought, rather
Mhm.
than the original words. Or because if you're going to go with, we have to do the word for word type of thing with the closest word,
Mhm.
then you should also logically say we have to have the same word order, the same syntax. And
Mhm.
I can pretty much guarantee that if you were to read, you know, uh, a strictly literal translation of either the Hebrew Old Testament or the Greek New Testament, that it would be very hard for you to understand what was going on, because they don't write their sentences in the same way. Uh,
Mhm.
so I think, all translations have a goal of trying to reach a target audience. The New American Standard target audience, if I'm right in remembering, is about 11th grade, or people who have received at least an 11th grade education and who live in the Western world, and English is their primary language. So what they're trying to convey by using mind is that, um, well, they're trying to not create a problem where there isn't really a problem. If they put belly there, your belly conceives, a Westerner reading that would think, well, your belly doesn't conceive anything. That's weird. Um, so,
I see. I understand what you're saying.
yeah. Yeah.
can
If
I
you
read
take it,
what my,
yeah,
oh,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead, Shirley.
Can I read what my Bible says about that particular verse, about that
Y-
particular sentence?
Yes.
Okay, it says, and their belly prepareth deceit, meaning that their inward parts frames and devises that which is designed to deceive others, and in the end proves deceitful to themselves. Eliphaz had a very low opinion of Job. He had decided that Job's heart was evil, and that all of his iniquity was perceived in his evil heart.
Mm. Yeah, so I agree with everything except for the sentence that started with Eliphaz has decided that Job is evil. But certainly the part about the belly, meaning that they devised things from their inward parts, right? The inner person basically is devising this. And for the Hebrews, the inner person is spoken of, you know, as the kidneys or the belly or something like that, rather than the mind and even the heart. So, but I think
Interesting.
Catherine, just getting back to what the New American Standard, just getting back to that, I don't think that there's any real difference, you know, any appreciable difference, because I think that the thought is conveyed whether you say mind or belly. If you're familiar with the Hebrew idiom and you read belly, then you know what's being said anyway. It's the person, the center, you know, the inward person is doing something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah. Okay. 8 o'clock. Anybody else have anything before I turn off the recording? So next week, I'm really looking forward to doing the next 2 chapters. I hope they're as good as they look to me. I hope I'm able to explain it well. They're really good. Because Job is speaking, and it's just phenomenal. You know, I think, I mean, there's just so much in there. Such a good thing. So I'm
Rebuttal.
going to turn off the recording.